thankful and I'm humbled to be asked again to come here and speak before you. But since I've been here, I haven't found anybody that can bring me out better than Michael Hardy. So let's give Michael Hardy a round of applause. So as Michael Hardy said, my name is Victor Pate. I'm the chairman of the Second Chance Committee here at the National Action Network, as well as a formerly incarcerated person. Second Chance is a committee that assists the formerly incarcerated men and women as they transition from prison to community, as well as being engaged in a larger platform of legislative criminal justice reform. And we are working towards a lot of criminal justice reforms that badly need to be changed. And we are also part of a larger collaborative of criminal justice reform organizations. I work for the National Originals Campaign Against Torture, and my actual paid job is the New York statewide organizer for the Campaign for Alternatives to Isolated Confinement. And we're working on a bill in Albany to abolish solitary confinement in our prisons and jails, because this is torture, and no one should be held in solitary confinement for any particular period at all. So I'll go on with my brief presentation. And I was asked basically to speak about certificates of relief for disability, which Michael briefly related to. Certificates of relief for disability, as it's professionally known, is a document that is issued by the courts that remove certain barriers that will allow you or not allow you to get licenses, employment, go to school, housing, and a few other things. And a person is eligible to get a certificate of relief from disabilities post-incarceration or either post-conviction. Now, a lot of people are sometimes confused between what the certificate of relief from disability actually does. Well, a certificate of relief for disability is something that I would definitely urge anybody who has had any type of conviction up to one felony. Now here's where it differentiates. You can only apply for a certificate of relief for disability if you have a number of misdemeanor convictions, but only one felony. Oh, okay, somebody just told me. So I'll go on another part then. Sorry about that. Pardon. So I would definitely say.
Welcome to the Gilchrist Experience. As you see, that's our regular Victor Pate, Second Chance, President of the Second Chance Committee, National Action Network. And that's our legal night, which you're available for anybody's attending, where you get legal representation for whatever needs you have in the legal profession. But today, our main guest is a judge who's retired and serving the people as he has for these many years. And he's, introduce yourself, Judge Milton.
Tingling.
Milton.
Yeah.
Judge Milton.
All right, well, good evening, everybody. I am Justice Milton Adair Tingling. I'm a retired Supreme Court Justice of New York State, and I am currently the New York County Clerk, Commissioner of Jurors, and Clerk of Supreme Court.
All right.
Oh, I'm still talking, okay. A little bit of background, I'm a retired Supreme Court Justice. In 2014, November 7th, I was reelected to a second 14-year term. 5 weeks later, I retired. And I retired to accept an appointment to my current position as New York County Clerk and Commissioner of Jurors. New York State is 230 years old, and I am the first black county clerk in the history of New York State. New York State has 62 counties. I am also the first black Commissioner of Jurors in the history of New York State. And during the course of this conversation, I hope to relate my reasons for doing so because of the importance of these positions.
I was going to ask.
And your relationship to Victor. Victor brought you to this this forum, Legal Night at the NAN, which is once a month, every last Thursday of the month. And the topic that Victor was just talking about is getting felons to be Tell us about it, Victor.
Well, basically, and just a minor correction, I wasn't the one who actually brought him to National Action Network Legal Night, but I met him there. And I was invited actually by Michael Hardy to share the stage with the judge here.
Oh, okay.
And asked to, give a little insight into.
That's right. You're a good friend of Reverend
Yeah.
Sharpton. Okay.
And so I actually met him there. So he was there before I got there. But basically, as you know, I do work around criminal justice legislative reform. And Michael had told me that they were going to be talking about certificates of relief from disabilities and certificates of good conduct. And as you see in the rolling, I actually began to talk a little bit about the certificates and what the benefits of having a certificate was. And that's something that, I myself would think that that's something as part is when you're talking about reintegration and transformation, these certificates go along with all of that, especially for a person who has past criminal justice involvement because of the fact of the multiple barriers that are in place that are part of the collateral damages of having a criminal history and or being incarcerated. And these certificates are something that anyone who has any past criminal history, felonies, et cetera, should definitely apply for and have, because it would afford them more of an opportunity to progress in whatever chosen field that they have, but more so to be included in a process that they should be included in if they're back in the community and they are doing some things and they have done some things to change their lives. So these certificates are something that I think that anybody who's ever been involved in the criminal justice system, if you've ever been in prison or if you've never even been in prison, to get, because it would
where do you
definitely
go
increase.
And the judges,
The
where
judge
you
is
go
going to
get this
yeah,
certificate?
he gonna give you the good stuff. I'm just giving you the overview. He is the expert here, so I'll turn it over to him. I'll let him do his thing.
Well, Victor's certainly an expert. The question was going to be asked about, well, why would you leave the bench to do this?
That's exactly.
Judges are captives. I know that may seem outside of what the perception is, but as much power and authority that people perceive a judge has, they are also restricted.
Okay.
They are restricted by rules, by canon of ethics, and disciplinary rules.
Okay.
For example, a judge, a sitting judge, may not comment on a pending case,
Okay.
on any pending case anywhere in the world.
Wait a minute. Any case anywhere in the world?
You heard me. So, for example, if you saw a judge, let's take Akeem Browder.
Yes. Okay.
His case, if a judge saw the case and saw that he had been incarcerated for so many years without going to trial,
Right.
a judge could not hold a press conference and say, this man is in jail and hasn't gone to trial. If somebody is convicted and they take an appeal, the judge can't comment while that appeal is pending. The judge cannot comment after the appeal if there's another appeal.
So would you be able to comment on what's happening with Donald Trump? If
As
you
I
were
said,
on the
I am a
bench?
retired judge.
I mean, well,
If, as far as commenting on what's happening with Donald Trump,
Yeah.
were I still a presently sitting judge?
Yeah.
The answer is no.
you could say nothing.
No, and if you did, you would be subject to disciplinary action, including and up to removal from the bench. So, when
That-
asked,
Wow.
I have done trial work in New York. I have seen cases where even defendants had incompetent representation, and the judge knew it. And I'm wondering why the judge is not commenting on the ineptitude of the attorney. And now I understand.
that's one reason, but the other thing is that unfortunately after the trial, and in many instances resulting in convictions, there would be motions and there would be motions about the incompetence of counsel.
Yeah, right.
Okay? And so for the judge to comment on it during the trial might remove the underpinnings for that motion in order to rectify the situation.
Okay.
Okay? The judge is supposed to be an impartial
Impartial.
arbitrator, and once they get into the trial and act as an advocate,
You become prejudiced and
then on both sides, you know, we tend to look at it because you always hear about the cases where you've had incompetent counsel, okay, and a conviction is reversed.
Right.
But you never hear about the prosecution talking about a judge getting involved in the case and swaying it towards the defendant.
no.
The reality of it is that you have many cases, because the reality of it is that you have many judges sitting in criminal court who are former ADAs.
Assistant district attorneys.
That is correct. Okay? And while judges are supposed to be impartial, many times they are not.
So as a layman, I look at this and say everything's fixed.
No. And thank you for leading me back around to one of the original premises. Why would I leave the bench
Yeah.
when I have 14 more years? I never had to run again because I've always run for office. As you know, there's a great debate going on about appointing judges and electing judges. But when the term appointing comes up, they don't talk about appointment. They talk about merit selection. You see, that's the dress that is placed over what is no less political than elections. Appointments are as political as
course
any
they are.
election. Well, no, but remember, it's not an appointment, it's a merit selection.
I've got a question that's been bugging me for a long time. Now, you saw all the blockage of appointments that Obama tried to make.
Yes,
I think they had 123 seats open when he left office.
yes.
Now, I see Donald Trump's gotten in there and appointed federal judge for life. Now, how is that affecting the country?
Federal judges are appointed for life. You've seen the appointments already start to affect.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things that have been done that are not publicized, or quite frankly, the public doesn't understand the implications
Yeah.
of those rulings.
Right.
You know, one of the most important rulings that ever took place is more than 20 years old. When the Supreme Court justices, all right, I'm dating myself, during our day,
Okay.
were supportive and enforcing the Civil Rights Act, including busing, to address the inequities and discrimination in education.
So what year were you first appointed? As
I was
justice?
never appointed, sir.
I mean,
As I said,
one election.
1996.
1996, okay.
Well, I've been a lawyer since 1982.
Okay.
But going back, one of the most important rulings that ever happened was a little-known ruling that the U.S. Supreme Court made in the 90s, in which they said that busing was not a permanent solution to address the inequities of discrimination in education.
All right.
And as a result, look at all of the things that have been chipped away. New York City now is #1 or #2 in the most segregated public school system
Yeah.
in the country.
Mm-hmm. New York.
New York City,
Okay.
in the country. Okay? This did
That's-
not happen overnight. During the civil rights acts that were being enforced in the 70s and 80s, reading scores went up. You had much more of an equality in terms of the students and their interaction. You had 40-60 percentages. Now you have public school systems where, 98%, 96% are all minorities. You had the Robert Jackson, who's running for state senator now, and he brought his lawsuit to Committee on Fiscal Equity, where he proved that as New York City school system became more segregated, we received less
That's money.
of the state funding for education and the effects of that inequality. All of these things come out of court rulings. You saw recently that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that employers can, in a contract, mandate that you cannot join a class action and that you have to arbitrate any workplace issue, you have to arbitrate it. But you cannot arbitrate collectively. You have to arbitrate individually.
Wow.
Can you give us an example of a case like that where it would affect us?
You work at Walmart,
Okay.
okay? And you have an allegation of discrimination in that
Okay.
you were not
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
you were not moved into managerial status
Because
of the color of your skin or
Okay.
something else.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
when you signed your contract, the contract said if you have a workplace dispute, you have to arbitrate it, which means you cannot bring a lawsuit. And it says you have to arbitrate it individually, which means that you have to bring your own suit and spend your own money for arbitration. You cannot go into court.
Oh, okay. So it costs you a fortune to.
If 1,000 people sue on the same issue in court, you have an action. If
Well, that's a
1,000
class
people,
action.
correct.
Class
If you have 1,000 people that have to bring an arbitration action, but do it individually,
Ooh, that's expensive.
It'll take years to arbitrate each.
So who's here to fight a ruling like that?
the Supreme Court is the final arbiter of the law. And that goes back to the original Supreme Court and the original Chief Justice, John Marshall, who declared that the U.S. Supreme Court is the final arbiter of the law. And one of the things about this country is that, I mean, aside from the Civil War, is that we do not have violent revolution that agree or disagree when parties change,
Okay.
when different ones take over. It is done in a civil, non-military,
Right.
okay?
Right.
We don't have military coups.
Right.
And that's something that's become accepted. And part of that has to do with the rule of law, which is, you know, to segue back to one of the things Victor is working on every day, and one of the things that I left the bench to be able to do. What I do today, I would not be able to do on the bench.
Right.
I started a project called The Initiative, in which I educate, facilitate, and assist formerly incarcerated in applying for and become educated about their rights to certificates of relief and certificates of good conduct.
Okay.
Also, so important, their voting rights.
Amen. Yeah.
Yes.
Vital.
In the past 2 years, my group and I have been to Rikers Island 3 times and registered people to vote who were sitting in jail waiting. Because the law, which was changed, the election law of the state of New York, which was changed 7 years ago, now states that there are only 2 impediments to voting. One is that you're on parole, which Victor and I will address, and the other one is that you're currently incarcerated pursuant to sentence,
Yes.
which means that if you're in on bail, you can vote. If you're on probation, you can vote. If you finish your sentence, you can, and you're not on parole, you can vote. But the perception of your rights to vote are what I call the Florida cover. Once you have a felony conviction, you can never vote again.
That's in
Graham was
Florida.
talking about his cousin, you know, who's law enforcement down there. And that's the perception around the country. I have a felony
Yeah.
conviction. I can never vote again, ever.
There's only 13 states where that statute holds. Only 13.
Exactly.
Florida,
Okay.
Texas, I don't know the others, but New York. We registered 5,000 guys in East New York a number of years ago with Johnny Ray Youngblood at our church years ago.
Yes.
And guys told, well, you know, I got a felony. You're not, are you on parole? No. Fill out the form.
That's right.
But don't just fill it out. You need to go and vote.
Right.
Engage.
The education.
How
You know,
many
to
of
show
these
you the
guys are
flip
really
side
in-
of it.
How many of
and-
these guys are really interested in voting?
Because that's where the education comes in.
Okay.
About what it means.
Right, okay.
You know, New York City, the city council,
Right.
local election, local official.
So you go
they
in as a
established a
judge
bail
and
fund.
explain this to them?
Keep talking till I can't.
Okay.
You have New Hampshire, where you never lose your right to vote.
Okay.
You can be serving a life sentence with no possibility of parole, and you can still vote.
What?
While
Because
incarcerated.
voting was determined many years ago by the U.S. Supreme Court to be a state,
Right.
that it was determined individually by each state.
Okay.
And that's what you have.
Okay.
Our people of color tend to think voting's not important. One of the things I do when I'm going around is that I give a little sheet which has some of the black codes on them from the end of the Civil War and Reconstruction. And one of the things that ties them all together is that no person of color can vote, sit on a jury.
Right.
And I always tell them, I said, if it wasn't important, why would they always specifically not let you vote and not let you sit on a jury?
Right.
You know, I'm here, I'm not gonna lie, because I'm too old. I run into our people that don't want to serve on juries. You know, it's too much of a bother. I don't want to go down, it's a waste of time.
Right.
And I'm like, who do you think is being run through this system? It's our sons and daughters, it's your nieces and nephews.
That's right.
It's your grandchildren. And then you want to come and complain about how racist the system is.
Right.
Because you don't become involved.
That's it.
Your vote makes all the difference.
I served the first time last year on a jury, and I wound up being the jury foreman.
Wow.
So when they called my name, the judge says, Mr. Weatherspoon, you take seat number 1. I said, wow, that's the jury foreman seat. So then they go through an interview process with each juror.
That's right.
Defense, prosecution, and the judge. And he asked me, where do you live? Brooklyn. Married, single, how many kids? What's your profession? I said, retired. He said, from where? I said, NYPD. And the whole courtroom went, ooh.
Right, exactly.
Then he asked, what was my title? I said, detective. And all the jurors are like, but it was funny because it was a weapons case, and these cops came in lying.
Ooh.
The arresting officer, the 2 backup officers, the lieutenant, everybody had a different story. The only person who was credible was the technician from the firearms unit. So when we went in to deliberate, I said, I listed all the witnesses. I said, did anybody have a problem with the arresting officer? Everybody hand went up. The lieutenant, everybody. So nobody found the story to be credible because we got 4 different versions of the same story. So there was one lady who felt, oh, well, I believe the police. All right, we're going to go through this again. Ultimately, he was acquitted. We deliberated maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. But it is important, and I spoke with the DA after the trial. I said, I was a detective. And if I sat in court like that, they take my shield from me.
Yes, yes.
And the integrity with a lot of these officers does not exist, unfortunately. And they're not being held accountable.
That was my second thing.
And
Your story?
did you see this all the time?
Well, so, yeah. So I'm gonna give you my story. All right, I'm also the commissioner of jurors. All right, I'm the
like
first
that.
black, and I'm happy to say that through efforts, we now have another one. There is Betty Campbell, the Honorable Betty Campbell, who is now the commissioner of jurors for Westchester County.
Okay.
So, as commissioner of jurors, my name is on every jury summons. Every jury summons in New York County. And that is for pettit and for grand juries, civil and criminal.
Okay.
And so I had changed up the jury call system, run into some opposition from a lot of the older sitting judges. And so to make my point, I issued myself a summons to go to jury duty. And I issued it for me to go to the criminal parts. And so I'm sitting in the assembly room, and my name was called. So I'm sitting in the hallway waiting to be called in to be voir dire. And I've been around for a while, so clerks, attorneys walking by going, Judge, what are you doing here? I'm like, well, I'm here for jury duty. They're like, man, get out of here. Nobody's gonna pick you. What are you kidding me? Come on, get it. I said, no, I'm serious. So I went in on the first case, and it was too long. I had another obligation. I got called to a second case, but by the time I got in, they finished picking. And I'm sitting here listening to your story, Graham, and it's mine. I got called to a third one. And it was, I live in Washington Heights. It was a weapons and drug trial, 9 blocks from my house.
Wow.
Okay? And so the interesting dynamic, and you didn't say it, but I'm feeling it, is that the district attorney's office is sitting there going, oh, he's a former judge. He's all right. He's going with us.
Right.
Okay?
I figured that, right?
Yeah.
And when I was on the bench, one of the things that I always tried to establish was, just bring me the fact, just bring me the case.
Right.
I'm not leaning this, bring me the facts.
Right.
Everybody gets a fair shake.
Right.
So defense counsel knew me from then. He had been around.
Right.
And so he's like, oh, I want him. Nobody challenged me. They asked me a simple question, which they ask everybody. Can you hear the evidence and judge and be impartial and judge based on? And I sat there and said, yes. And I threw in, I said, quite frankly, every judge
Should be able to.
should be on a jury because if you can't be impartial, you should never do a bench trial.
Right.
Right.
All right, so I go on, not the foreman. Now, one of the other things that they always say is, we don't want judges on juries because they'll take over. Let me tell you something. I went back into that jury room, and people hate judges, okay? They're in the back. If a judge tries to take over a jury, everybody will try and show they're smarter than that judge.
Okay.
I sat back there and didn't say a word. Let everybody speak. I only spoke when people asked me something. And a lot of times it was just about procedure. What do we do if we need to leave the room or go to the bathroom? Whatnot. I said, well, there's a bathroom in the back. If you need to leave, ring the bell. Court officer will come, ask you what it is, and then let you know. I never voted to the end. And much like your case, it all fell apart. You know, at the end, the officers were basically laughing at themselves. The stories were so ridiculous. I had one other person of color on the jury. All the rest were white. I had a hedge fund manager's wife. I had 3 women that didn't work because they didn't have to. And at the end of the trial, when we were voting, and the vote was quick, but at the end, one of them said, this is ridiculous. You know, why are we here? There's no way. And what I said to her was, I said, I appreciate your comment, but I need you to understand something, that on these 2 floors of 100 Center Street, there are 6 other trials going on like this, some of them with the same flimsy evidence, and those people are being convicted. And that, they were shocked at. I said, but that's the reality. So you need to be ambassadors and go out and tell people, come in here, take it seriously. This is real. You know, it's not law and order. Everybody's, and some of it, you know, I mean, you've seen it, so.
The appearance of.
Another thing, I sat with a stone face. The DA would look at me, or the defense, and the clerk at one point looked at me. After hearing a comment by one of the officers, he turned to look at me and see, and I'm.
You doggone right.
So they couldn't read me. They didn't know where I was until we came back with the verdict. But it's important that we serve on these juries, because I'm not saying you let somebody off just because they're black. I'm not saying that, because there are people committing crimes. White, black, Latino, Asian, all groups of people are committing crimes.
There are bad guys
But
out
there are people who are being railroaded, falsely accused, and are serving time right now for crimes they did not commit.
Yeah, and I know so many people and so many friends of mine that, you know, unfortunately, you know, got caught up in a bad situation and had ineffectiveness of counsel, wound up doing 30, 40 years. And that's just about how long it took them for the appeal to finally come through. But you've been served 40 or 50 years in prison and being wrongfully convicted. That's a crime.
Judge, can I get your opinion on what you think about what's happening with Trump?
In terms of what?
Him wanting to pardon everybody, the shenanigans of the Congress and everybody else. The injustice of it all. I mean, he's a spy, in effect. He's Putin's, I won't say it, but.
There are 2 issues. And one has been the suggestion that were he be convicted of something, that he could pardon himself. Okay. The law, as written on pardons, he can pardon everybody. There's never been a situation where a president has sought to pardon themselves. However, the way the law is written is that his pardon power is absolute, except as to impeachment. Okay? So in other words, he can be impeached and be removed. But it has never been tested whether or not he could pardon himself on what the impeachment was based on, which would be high crimes or treason. So on that, I don't know. As far as his ability to pardon everybody else, his son, Manafort, Santa Claus, it's absolute.
If he were charged by New York State, I know that Eric Schneiderman.
That's been an issue, yes.
You know, and I was looking at that. I said, well, if they charged him in New York State before Mueller charged him in any of the federal districts, that would be an interesting ploy. He can't pardon himself from a crime in the state of New York, or maybe a crime in the state of Florida.
That'd be an
That
interesting
would be.
test.
So I
What do you
had
think is
really
going to
thought of
happen?
that.
Is that why they got rid of Erickson?
No, Schneiderman,
Snyderman? I
he
mean?
did
I'm
himself
sorry.
in. He did himself in. There'll be another election in the fall,
Right.
but
Well, you
whatever.
know, Letitia James
Yes,
just
good friend.
received the
That's right.
Democratic nomination
Yeah,
Okay.
for
Good.
Attorney General.
Right.
that's my girl.
September.
That's my girl.
We
Okay.
good.
Yeah.
Well, should
We
be.
got so much to talk about. Sorry, everybody, but we got so much to
Well,
talk
that's-
about.
Well, and
No.
that's just as well. And you know, when you're speaking about the political climate and the politics and stuff, and I'm gonna just drop this in right quick. So we talked about voting rights and how important it is for voting rights, and especially people in returning to our communities and stuff, being granted certain rights, having the opportunity to fully participate in civic process, something that we in the criminal justice reform take very seriously, and we had taken it so seriously that we sort of like pushed the issue about voting rights. So in case you don't know, and some may know, that now Governor Cuomo has signed into executive order the right for people that are on parole in New York State to vote. And what that basically means is that anyone that is on unrevoked parole, that's key, unrevoked parole, will be granted a conditional pardon that will give them the right to vote. They just have to make sure that they register. But also, we have to look at not only with the right to vote, but with the right to vote also needs to come the educational component, because that's a very important piece and mechanic in terms of what you do and what you support and what you understand.
Where do you go to get this
about
education?
Say that again?
Where do you go to get the education?
Well, as it stands right now, because this actually just happened within the last couple of weeks, Department of Corrections have submitted, I think it was like the number we got was 24,000 people that are currently on parole in New York State now have been granted conditional pardons to vote. The educational piece comes along with one through the Department of Correction and Community Supervision through the parole office. That's the first line of education, because it's their duty and it's their responsibility based upon the arrangements that have been made by Governor Cuomo's executive order, and that they have to explain to them that they first of all have this right. Secondly, they have to physically give them the certificate that is called a conditional pardon that grants them the right to vote, and explain to them what the process is for them to actually vote. In terms of the initial process, they must actually first register. Now, the educational component is actually coming from those of us who are part of this push to have voting rights for people that are on parole in New York State. And we are actually going to begin the process of education next week. Our first session is going to be at Medgar Evers College on June the 14th. A group of us that have been a part of this push are going to roll out the first educational informational forum about the voting process itself for people who are just newly granted their parole rights.
And the initiative comes into play here?
We do all of that. I heard two questions there. One is the education about how to restore your right to vote. And please, everybody that's listening, if you were registered to vote before, obtained a felony conviction, and now you've been granted a pardon, you must re-register. And for those of you who've never registered to vote, you have to register. So everybody just register to vote.
Okay.
That's it, period. The second thing is education about, well, what to do with my vote. And that is both personal and it's also community. We need to educate ourselves about district leaders. We need to educate ourselves about state committee people. We need to educate ourselves about city council people. One of the things that I speak about is many people have heard the name Congressman Charles Rangel.
Right.
43 years, should have heard of him. And Charles Rangel retired and his seat came up. Now, in order to have a congressional district, you have to have at least 750,000 residents. Not voters, residents.
Okay.
His seat came up for election. There was a race between State Senator Adriano Espaillat and Assemblyman Keith Wright.
Right.
Charles Rangel supported Keith Wright. It's known as a Harlem seat, but the reality, which is part of the political education, is that that district goes into the Bronx. That district goes up almost into Westchester. Okay? It goes into Washington Heights.
Has it always done
No,
that? Has it not?
it's been changed because
Redistricting.
redistricting. No, Graham, please.
No.
You know, Attorney General Holder has been working with President Obama on the redistricting of congressional districts and the gerrymandering that was going on. New Orleans, as a city of the concentration of black people, they were not in control of their city.
Right.
Because the districts were lined up so that every area was linked to a predominantly white neighborhood outside of the city. So when it came to vote on anything in the city, the blacks had no control over their own city. And the way that this district is drawn up, you know, with, and I don't want it to sound like it's a black Latino thing, all right? But when you have a district that runs from central Harlem all the way to Washington Heights and then going up through the Bronx to Westchester County, it makes no sense.
When did that change?
2010.
I was
Every
about to
time,
bring that up.
every 10 years there's a census,
Okay.
and then you have
2010.
redrawn
Well,
the lines.
this is throughout the country this happened.
Well, part of that is about the education, but the point I wanted to make about this is a congressional district.
Right.
There are billions of dollars that Congressman Rangel has brought into this congressional district, helping people with education, helping people with jobs, employment, businesses, tax credits, tax breaks, the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone, all of this. What was the vote differential in that congressional election?
Ooh. Wow.
Let's just
50,000
guess.
votes?
Excellent.
What'd you say?
Excellent.
50,000?
Said 50,000 votes. Excellent. Excellent. You on top of it.
Right.
The vote differential was 854 votes.
800 and, oh, that's.
And only 54,000
No,
people?
that was his guess.
Right.
The real
But
number
that-
was 854.
Oh, that's scary.
That was the vote differential.
That's scary.
Graham, you registered
Design.
5,000
No.
people to vote. With 1,000 people that were loyal to you,
wow.
or you educated, or came down, you now controlled a congressional district.
854 people?
The vote differential was 854 votes.
That's unreal.
Our people need to understand, and I tell this to young people, in the stop and frisk heyday, I said, if the cops are bothering you, your parents don't care. And they said, what do you mean?
They don't vote.
They don't vote. If you fail to vote for a mayor, from the mayor you get a police commissioner. And from the police commissioner, you get police policy, and you get hassle. So if we're not voting on the local level,
Yes.
if we
Yes.
fail to understand that black people died to give us my grandfather never learned to read, write, or vote a day in his life as a Georgia sharecropper. Never. And we have young people today that unfortunately don't see the importance in it, and they don't understand that a politician owes you nothing if he feels he didn't get anything from you. If he didn't get your vote, it's like later for you, I'm concentrating on the people that got me to the position that I'm in. And we need to be very astute. Voting for the presidency, you don't vote. The Electoral College does the vote.
But still, you should vote.
You should vote, but local elections are critical. Critical to our existence. The Board of Education, everything going on around us comes out of that vote. The district leaders, the city council persons, all of that.
All starts there. There's so many people sitting there. Now, of course, there's a close Rikers movement. There's a get rid of bail movement, but it's not there yet. And there are many people sitting in Rikers because they can't make $1,000 bail.
Or less.
Because of the Browder case.
The city council actually passed legislation to establish a bail fund that you can access. It's only now coming into being, but to me, it is an example about how local legislative politics directly affects your situation. You got to see it. When I was at Rikers and I told people about this bail fund, people that were sleeping woke up.
They didn't know.
You know, I'd like to hear more from you, Judge, of why you left the court to come do all this. Is there a personal reason for this, or just the injustice that you see, or the 854 votes that you saw not being cast?
About this a long time. I've been very blessed in my life. You know, you start out, and hopefully you have good parents, which I did. You know, it's been a unique experience. My father was a judge.
Ah, okay.
My father was a judge. Now, New York State Constitution says all judges must retire at 70. You can stay on the bench another 6 years only if you're an elected Supreme Court judge.
Okay.
You can be a judge of the highest court in the state, the Court of Appeals, but you have to retire at 70. But if you're an elected Supreme Court justice, you can be certificated up to age 76. Well, my father was 62 when he became a judge, and he didn't make it to 70. Died at 66.
Wow.
I was elected when I was 42 and went on the bench. And now today, my daughter, my oldest daughter, is also a judge.
All right.
Well,
And we are the only 3-generation black family of judges in the history of this country. And she was elected when she was 39. So you ask me why? Because I've been blessed. But also being a judge, coming from good parents, have opportunities and other stuff, did not mandate that my children would have anything.
right.
No.
So while my oldest daughter is a judge, my oldest son is somebody walking around with felony convictions.
Oh, okay.
Because who I am doesn't mandate who anybody else
That's
is.
right. That's right.
And the same things that draw young people into the system, they were there for him. They were attractive balls that he followed. I look at him and I look at his friends and I see the same issues. And so doing what I do now allows me to address those issues,
Okay.
to step in, to have my
right.
say,
Right.
to be
Right.
unfettered.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
You know, I'm probably on the bench best known for being the judge that shot down Mayor Bloomberg's soda law.
Soda
Yeah, that's all I could find.
But that's
On
not
YouTube.
my best decision.
Okay.
The best decision I ever made was I had a case where the Division of Youth and Family Services routinely, as a matter of policy, if you were in a youth facility upstate, because there are not a lot in the city, and you were brought down to court, they would shackle you, both leg and hands, and even the box shackles. That's where they place boxes over your hand. Imagine trying to grab yourself to pee with a couple of metal boxes around you. And imagine having a 6-7 hour ride to New York,
Shackle.
going into the court and having your case adjourned and putting right back in the van and being sent upstate. And the case was brought before me against Gladys Carrion, who was the commissioner at that time, former commissioner.
Right, I remember her.
And I ruled in favor of the child, and I granted a permanent injunction against the state of New York in doing this. And the law requires that the Attorney General challenge any time that a law or rule is found to be unconstitutional. Okay? But I'm very proud of that decision because they did not challenge and they consented to the judgment. And there's now a permanent injunction in place against it.
Excellent. Excellent.
Fabulous.
You have, as a judge, our young people need to meet you across the city.
Really?
You know, when you say a judge, a young kid will probably think of most likely somebody white, although there are a number of black judges. And
Oh, yeah.
Kevin Loose Bruce?
I knew him.
Everybody.
I had cases in front of Judge
I never got a chance to be in front of him. I wish
Bruce
I would
Wright.
have.
I had cases with him, and I felt it an honor to be standing in front of him. I effected an arrest. He was on the bench. I never had any problems, you know, personally or professionally, with Judge Wright. And it is something. It is a profession law. I really tell kids today we need more blacks in law. Our people need the help in that arena, and it's not just criminal law.
No. No.
You know, there are so many
Across the board.
diversified areas of law. Anything you can think of, there's law for it. Even on the manufacturing of these plastic items, what material can be used. So, you know, our kids really need to understand there's more that they can do than play basketball and football. And they can do something that is helpful to the community and the people that really need help. But we desperately need students of law across the country.
And speaking about meeting the judge, and speaking about education and you know, being informed and educated into certain laws and certain components of our society, things that's going on, I would like to defer to my colleague here, and because I don't want us to get away from this very, very important workshop that we are collaborating on that's upcoming, and I just want him to mention that so people will be aware with regards to the work that he's doing on an ongoing basis.
Well, we are, Victor and I and a number of councilmen, assembly people, and also with New York County lawyers, one of the largest bar association here in New York County, are collaborating on a session. We are going to be on June 23rd, Saturday, from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. We are going to be at the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene at 158 East 115th Street. We are inviting everybody. We will come. We will register you to vote, okay? If you're eligible and you have your certificates, if you're on parole, if you're not and you have convictions. By the way, if you have a misdemeanor conviction, you can have $1 million. You never lost your right to vote. We are also going to assist those that want to apply for their certificates of relief and certificates of good conduct. We will go more into all of the details, but if you're going to come, you have a felony, and you want those, please try and bring a copy of your rap sheet, copy of your income tax the last 2 years. If you don't have them, just come and tell us you don't have them, okay? You also want to have copies of W-2s or any employment that you have. If you've been working off the books, you're working off the books, okay? Think of the reasons to come. Don't convince yourself of the reasons not to appear, okay? Your employment history and residence for the past 2 years. And again, June 23rd, 11 to 3, 158 East 115th Street. And we're getting close. I wanted to throw this out to you because we were talking about the importance of juries. The judiciary law of New York State says that in order to serve on a jury, you must be 18 years of age, a citizen, a resident of the county, and you must be able to understand the English language. It also says you cannot have been convicted of a felony. So while you can be convicted of a felony and vote, convicted of a felony, you can't serve on a jury. But
that's changed.
Well,
Guess who
a little
changed?
thing called conflict. You also have the correction law of the state of New York. And it says that when you receive a certificate of relief or a certificate of good conduct, no right, privilege, or duty
Can be denied you.
which has been forfeited solely on the basis of a felony conviction
Can
may
be denied. Okay.
There's a real conflict there, right? You lost your right to serve on a jury because of the felony, but you have the certificate of relief which says they can't do that. You have two laws, they're in conflict. So we sent it up to the Attorney General, he looked at it, he came back with an opinion, and his opinion was that the correction law wins. But it's not unfettered. It says that what it does is that it now allows you to be qualified. And your ability to be qualified to serve on a jury rests in the sole discretion of the local commissioner of jurors.
And
Guess
you
who
are-
that is?
And you are that.
I like that part. That's the
And
part
you
I
are
like.
that.
So
I
in
really-
New York County, and where was it, Westchester?
Westchester,
Those two counties,
you got your shot.
a former convicted individual may serve on a jury.
Maybe qualified.
Qualified to
That's
serve. Because I was going to ask you the certificate of release and the certificate of good conduct. What are the benefits of each? I mean, sometimes a guy might be looking. A guy might want to get a job with the MTA, or with a
Right.
city agency or something, or they might want to go back to school. Could you tell us the benefits of each of the two certificates?
Well, so based upon your conviction status, right? Having a benefit of one of the certificates, one removes the barriers that are normally in place if you have a conviction. So everybody fills out an application and says, "Have you ever been convicted of a crime?" Yes, I've been convicted of a crime. So what happens? What happens is that when you go and you apply for services, when you apply for a job, when you apply for tuition, et cetera, these certificates basically serve the purpose to say that although you may have a conviction for a particular crime, whether it be felony or non-felony, based upon your behavior, based upon your transformation, that these certificates say that you have been rehabilitated and you have been reformed. So you should be given a fair opportunity as if someone else has never been convicted of a crime. So this is supposed to serve as your concrete proof that you're not that same person that you was at the time that you may have received this conviction, and you should be able to carry on with your life, to have full reintegration in school, in housing, in education, and in all facets of our society, and be able to participate fully and be considered as a person that is law-abiding. So that's the benefit of having those certificates. And without those certificates, oftentimes people who have been incarcerated or who have convictions, they run into that, well, you have a conviction and no, we can't hire you because there's a possibility you might do something else. Well, these certificates say no. We haven't, if he got 9 felonies, but he has the certificate, and the certificate says that this person is no longer a threat to society, is not committing crimes, and he should be granted full rights as a citizen to fully participate in the system through all the above named components. That's the benefit of having these certificates, as well as what the judge explained as being able to serve on the jury, you know what I'm saying, things of that nature there. So these certificates are something that's, I guess, key and very important for our people who have these convictions and have been in prison and are now struggling to fully reintegrate back into society. And because of the fact that they don't have these certificates, oftentimes run into these barriers. So they should be given full participation, and they should definitely come and apply for these certificates, which is why the judge and I are collaborating on this here. And I thank the judge so profoundly for doing the work that he's doing and for bringing this service, and him and his people and his lawyers and stuff like that, because as is always, systemically, across the board, down the line, it is always our people who suffer the worst adverse effects of these policies that's systemically in place.
You know, I've learned a lot today, thank you for coming, Judge. I mean, really, this is an eye-opener for me. I think it's an eye-opener for most of us because we've always, especially if you're incarcerated and you've been called a felon or that you're no right to anything. And it's so important to understand that you're always important and that to help our community, we have to vote. We have to take advantage of what's available to us. Not sit back and complain about everything. If you're not voting and complaining, you're not adding. You're adding to the enemy. You're a fool, really.
Right? what Governor Cuomo has done. I congratulate Victor and everybody that's worked on this. 10 years ago, if you had a felony conviction, you could not vote. And now we've gotten to the point where you're on parole and you'd be eligible to vote. 10 years may be a long time, but it's a short time from the 100 years before that.
Oh.
So this is fabulous. And the whole thing about getting certificates and making the applications, I believe that the more applications that are made, that we move closer to getting to a point where we will have more and more of them granted, and that the criteria for getting them will be more solid than just individual discretion. I've had cases where people have applied, they've come out, they're doing fabulously. There's no more that they can do. And they've applied for these certificates and received responses denied, not in the best interest of the community. You see, now to me, that's not satisfactory.
That's like saying...
Do they have an appeal to that?
You can, but the reality of it is I just said, there's a frustration factor.
Right.
And that you've come out
What
and you've
more do
done
I have
this.
to do?
Right,
What
right,
more
right,
can
right,
I do?
right.
I've got a job, I'm living clean, I
Right.
have a residence. I'm working in things where I'm helping people. And understand about these certificates, it also raises rights that you have under executive law and under employment law. If someone denies you employment based on your record, where what you were convicted of has no relation to the job that you are seeking.
Even housing, correct?
Housing, absolutely.
Ah, right.
Tuition.
Don't
So,
forget-
people have applications. Fill out an application where they can't put that on an
We have
application.
to say goodbye to our Manhattan audience.
All right.
We have another minute for the Bronx.
When is-
Power
when
to
is-
the people. The God in me loves the God in you. And stay tuned for more of the Gilchrist experience. But don't forget,
June 23rd.
23rd.
138 East 100
158.
158.
158 East 116th Street. It's Department of Mental Health and Hygiene between Lexington and 3rd Avenue.
All right, that's June 23rd.
23rd.
11
Now,
o'clock.
Medgar Evers is
The 14th, I think.
June
That's the
14th.
That's June. That's the educational voters' rights educational
You got
component.
30 seconds, Judge. Anything
30
else?
seconds. I encourage everybody, please come to our session, 158 East 115th Street, June 23rd from 11 to 3. Also, please follow the Gilchrist experience.
Thank you.
No, very seriously, the education factor and the information is invaluable. Okay? So let's continue to educate ourselves and continue our mission. And thank you.
My pleasure,
Thank you.
man. Again, this has been a Gilchrist experience, right?
And his phone didn't go off.
And his phone didn't go off?
Power to the
It's been a
people. God
very good
bless.
session.